Schneider Electric is the proud sponsor of this podcast series. A core value for Schneider, for both its employees and customers, is to learn every day. They trust the following and will provide some learning for you today.
My name is Jo Taranto and I'm joined today by Dr. Judy Arasanilai, the Water Quality Systems Officer at MidCoast Council, and we're talking about water quality in the MidCoast Drinking Water Catchment. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you, Jo.
Now, we've had a situation where a number of severe weather events have placed the drinking water in your area under significant strain. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened over the 2017 to 19 period?
Okay, yeah. From 2017 to 2019, we had the worst drought in the MidCoast Council area, and then 2019 was the hottest and driest year in record for us, and all of our drinking water catchments or the rivers ceased to flow by December 2019. So then we also had the bushfires from October to December 2019, and which was actually the worst bushfires in Australia in terms of deaths and area affected. All of our catchments were affected by the bushfires. And our biggest catchment is the Manning catchment, which supplies our biggest customers. And this catchment, 30% of the catchment was actually affected. So during all the drought and during the fires, we have been using extensively our groundwater supplies, to supply water as well as to provide water to the firefighting effects as well. So when the rains were predicted for 2020 January, we actually needed the water, the surface water, we needed the water. But we also knew that the drought and the bushfires had a lot of impact on the catchment. So the catchment, because of the drought, the vegetation and the soils become parched. And then the bushfires came in and it kind of burnt all the trees. So now the catchments become even more erodible. And also, all the ash and burnt vegetation which has been dumped on the catchment. So we knew that with the big rains, the rain will actually wash all these contaminants into our waterways. So when these contaminants like, the ash, the nutrients, the burnt vegetation, and we might also have some metals and firefighting chemicals like fire suppressants and etc., they might all come into the waterways. So if we extract water from the waterways, it could present some challenges to our water treatment plants, water treatment processes. And we also have to comply when we supply the water to the customers. We have to comply to the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines. We just got health targets so that we don't, adversely affect the customers' health. So these Australian Drinking Water Guidelines also has this catchment to tap multiple barrier approach. So what we do is we look at the risks at the catchment, and then we put in multiple barriers which are called water treatment processes to protect the public from adverse effects. So the water treatment processes or the barriers should actually completely mitigate the risks found in the catchment. So we have done that before, and now because the catchments become more contaminated and more contaminants in the water, so we needed to go back and assess the risk again and tweak our treatment processes in order to comply with the to mitigate the risks actually. And yeah, so that's why we needed to do the study to find out, whether we can actually mitigate these risks or whether we needed to go back and look for another water, go back to our groundwater supplies. Yeah, and also it's kind of like a unique opportunity for us, these three events happening in a row, to study and plan for the future, because these events are going to become more frequent now.
Right. So it's been an opportunity to obviously make sure the drinking water is safe, but potentially use this information in the future as well. How did you choose the testing sites that you chose?
So we knew that two of our water supply catchment, drinking water catchments, were affected by the fires. So the Manning and the Crawford catchment, and the Manning catchment is the biggest catchment. And the Manning catchment is actually made up of several sub-catchments. And within the sub-catchments, we also knew that there were two particular catchments which were severely affected by the fires, so that the Navandock and the Dingo Creek catchment were severely affected by the fires. In fact, about 70% of the Navandock catchment was affected. And then we also had the Barrington catchment, which is the source water for our Gloucester water treatment plant supplies. So, and then this Navandock River and Dingo Creek actually flows into the Manning River before we extract water for our biggest supply, the Manning supply, which is served by the Bootua water treatment plant. So we basically went in and selected the water treatment plant offtakes, because that's where actually we are drawing the water. And then also we had one sampling point each for the worst affected catchments. That's the Navandock River and the Dingo Creek. Yeah.
You're listening to the Australian Water Association podcast series, and I'm speaking with Dr. Judy Arasanilai from MidCoast Council. When you were doing the testing, did you expect the results to have a different combination of impacts than if you just had a drought, or you just had a fire, or you just had heavy rain, as opposed to the fact that you had almost all three in a fairly tight succession? Did that really skew what you saw in terms of the impacts?
Yes, definitely. So the combination of the three events, like I said, the drought actually parched all the vegetation, and the soil became kind of parched as well. So the water wouldn't actually flow through the soil, and it kind of made the soil erodible. And then the bushfires, the bushfires again dumped all the ash, and the vegetation is now gone, because the vegetation would have held the soil together and would have actually filtered some of the contaminants. But now the vegetation is gone as well. And then you also had to have a high intensity rain to wash all this stuff into the waterways. So exactly all three of them happened at the same time. Yes, and it made the effect a lot serious. Yeah.
Was there anything surprising in the results?
So with the results, we kind of got what we expected, but however, with the Barrington so we saw catchment recovery at the second phase of our research or the investigation. However, surprisingly, the Barrington and the Crawford River catchment, so with the initial results, we had peaks of nutrients and also organic carbon, which basically comes from the vegetation and burnt vegetation and stuff. They all increased after the first flush. And then We also did subsequent rainfall events as well. So during the subsequent rainfall events, we saw a decrease in those contaminants. We still had a peak, but not as high as the initial peak. So that's what we were kind of expecting. After a while, everything would be washed into the sea after subsequent rain events, and the vegetation will regrow. So we kind of expected that. But when we looked at the Barrington and the Crawford catchment, these two rivers were only, a small area of these rivers were affected by the bushfires. However, the initial peak was pretty small compared to the second peak, which was actually equal to the initial peak in the Crawford, whereas in the Barrington, the second peak was a little bit higher than the initial peak. So that was a surprise, but we kind of think that the Barrington catchment was only, the fires were at the edge of the Barrington catchment, so maybe it might take a bit longer for it to come through. And surprisingly, we did not see any metals in the water. So we just saw some aluminium and iron at the Navandock and the Dingo Creek. So that's only kind of coming from all the soil which's been washed into the water. So that was a surprise to that, and it was a good surprise because we didn't find any metals in there.
And what does MidCoast Council do with the findings? You've identified that there's certain requirements that need to be acted on. Is that how you then respond?
Yes. So what happened was, after we did the initial test, so we looked at it, and we look at our water treatment processes, and we see whether we can, we optimized our treatment processes, and we increased our monitoring, and we sometimes, because in the Manning Supply we have an extensive network of reservoirs and reticulation pipes. So it's a big system. So we had to go in and put chlorine tablets in the reservoirs. So we increased the monitoring, and we did that. So by doing this, we were able to supply safe drinking water to all the communities. So we did that, and we can also use this research for future planning purposes as well, because I also identified the things which we also had to do in a longer time frame.
And so when you're preparing in future, you must be considering that there could be a scenario where you do get a similar contribution of extreme weather events that might even be worse than what we've got now. It wouldn't surprise anyone, that with the climate risks that are there. How will your findings help MidCoast Council plan for future water management strategies?
Yes, so we can see that these events are going to become more frequent because our region is getting drier and hotter, and also the rainfall events are becoming more intense and unpredictable as well. So these events are going to be more frequent. So what we've done now is that we have created a base for future work. So, and we have identified the gaps as well. So currently our council is in the middle of doing integrated water cycle management strategy, which means we look at the whole of the water system, including it is a strategic plan for the council. It's kind of a 30-year strategic plan. So they're looking at where they need extra dams or whether they need extra groundwater supplies. So we've got all this information for the planning team, who can use this information and plan for the future. And we've also got a water resilience team in the council. So they would probably look at, making the systems more resilient, drought resilient and more resilient, because we also have to consider the community in these sort of times, because there were lots of rural properties who lost their rainwater tanks and that. So they, council is also kind of looking at how you helped in those sort of situations. We also had to help those people. So yeah, we because we have already, we used our groundwater supply extensively. So we are also looking at, they also know the need for the groundwater supply now. And we also have a natural systems team which do all the catchment management programs. So they've got a 10-year plan. They've got a catchment manning river estuary and catchment management plan, where they look at managing the catchments so that we get good drinking water sources. So they have also got this information to look, to do their implement their catchment management works. And the rural planning team, they can also use this information through their rural planning process to make the drinking water catchments more safe.
It sounds like there's going to be a lot of positive benefits from the study. I've been speaking with Dr. Judy Arasanilai, the Water Quality Systems Officer at MidCoast Council. Thank you so much for your time, Judy.
Thank you, Jo.